This week, Chris Hedges offers up some historical rebellion so we understand where we came from and where we're headed to. Next up, climate camps and Klima Kamps show us how we could be living while teaching us how to dismantle the corporat-ocracy. And finally, Kevin Gosztola wants media and movements to work together, ensuring that every politician, corporate tool, law, and legislation is shadowproof. But first, let's go face to face with one of those corporate tools. If prostitution is illegal, why are you a corporate whore? Sorry, was that too curt, too abrupt? Did it hurt? The feelings nestled somewhere below this well-lubed facade of hope and change? Rearrange your pre-arranged speech. I got no interest in lines on repeat. Be straight with me. Honestly, honesty probably isn't your thing, like calm in a coke ring, fidgeting paranoid side effects of, for and by, the corporatist high. But that shit'll kill you, and I don't want to die by your side as you drive off a cliff wondering if there's more coke at the bottom. Spoiler alert, no. It's like rehab at Bedlam, like the black sites that nobody knows where you sent them. You know, the black-bagged and toe-tagged, the terrorist cells and 6x6 cells heavy on justice, light on the proof. Who you? Don't recall? Can't say for sure. If they're in there, there's reasons, so move along. Or don't. Patriot greats like the CCA have plenty of room for objectors, dissenters, and immigrants too. Yes, give me the real you. What should I do to drag it out from that suit, the twisted love child of greed and a fake smile? Show us your fangs, where remnants of poor people morbidly hang. Take it all off. Be proud of the real you. Dance on an aircraft carrier, like Cher in her prime. Throw out a line to the corporate kind, like saving the lifeboats from men drilling holes in the hull of our global collective soul. And the mind, fuck it. Who uses those anyway? All you need is to count. The hours you work, the debt that you're in, how much bigger and better the rich are who win. If greed is a sin and your cup runneth over, scheming on how to get richer much quicker, then why are you such a self-righteous prick? Oh, there I go again. Offending the defending powers that be, the ones waging wars for the brave and the free. I guess I can't see why. A childish question for someone who's blessed with never answering to me, to we the people. But now that I have you here, allow me to see the future as you do. The free slaves and brave drones, the silence and free speech zones, homecomings boxed up and draped with a Chinese-made symbol of us. U.S. empire, come up and strap yourselves all to the pyre, fireworks and fireworks. Witches and activists first, heads down and line up. Eat your bread and pay for your water. Pray for a quick death. You sheeple now ripe for the slaughter. Capitol Hill filled with meatheads and pigs. Kings of the graveyard got this game rigged. Slaves won't fight back when they can't see their chains. Frogs in the boiling pot, soaking, then writhing, the steam like a spa day. Come now, let us pray. Away all the hate. Love thy neighbor unless they're foreign or gay, 'cause God hates fags, or maybe that's racist and flags. Either way, pick a side and that's your salvation. Birth of a nation, like absentee parents. Who raised this bastard? Taught him manners, human relation. Guess we skipped how to tie your shoes and went straight how to shoot. No wonder we've got issues. PTSD from the sick life we lead, guardians sick and grotesque. Ask us to die nasty deaths in this die nasty of terror porn, greed and gore, love forlorn, a hopeless scorn. What are we fighting for? No, really, what the fuck are we fighting for? You can't fight addiction with needles and endless prescriptions. There is no more coke at the end of that rope. No hope in the halls of the mighty. Drug lords and corporatist scores, rehabs for quitters, and I gotta say, this game ain't for me. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out. Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. I'm going to start off this week by talking about nothing recent or upcoming. Indeed, I'm going to dig up the past like a disgruntled lover who never forgave you for forgetting that anniversary. But seriously, sexist stock photo? In my case, it's always been the guy who gets all pissy about that sort of thing. But I digress. Unlike those unpleasant episodes, I'll endeavor to make this dig much more enjoyable. As activists, our job is to stay on or even ahead of the news, to report breaking news, be part of the latest in the socio-political realm. And while that is, of course, vital to the integrity and progress of our work, it's also really, really important to know and study the past. And not just so we can offer up dutiful memes to activists past, but so that we might learn from their work and how their work was fought, destroyed, and covered up. Chris Hedges offers up some of this history in this week's Quote of the Day segment. As Hedges points out in his book, Wages of Rebellion, our history is peppered with the battles between the rich and the working class. And hell, this is a story as old as Aristotle. As Hedges explains, the quote-unquote freedoms that we all appreciate today, the sound bites of America, these are things that people have been fighting for, dying for, literally for decades. The democratic openings we achieved were fought and paid for with the blood of abolitionists, African Americans, suffragists, workers, and anti-war and civil rights activists. Our radical movements, repressed and ruthlessly dismantled in the name of anti-communism, were the real engines of equality and social justice. Those union workers who were killed, wounded, fired, or blacklisted, those civil rights and abolitionist activists who were killed, beaten, or jailed, the women and men who demanded justice in times of gross injustice, only to be made into stamps later on, these are the people who created our freedoms. Our country started out with only a sliver of the population, aka 6%, aka white property-owning men, allowed to vote. And this is not a particular bash on the US, every country has blood on its hands. But what is a bash on the US is that other countries, for the most part, seem to be more aware of the struggle for rights than we Americans are. We seem to think that the fucking freedom fairy brought them, like that they're just supposed to appear one day because America, and we're American, and that's what we do, freedom and fried Twinkies. And that, at least the freedom fairy part, is bullshit. If anything, the America we know today is a combination of ongoing fights for justice, hard-won battles, and bitter backtracking thanks to apathy and the ruthless punting of social movements. As Hedges describes in that same book, the establishment of what would become the FBI in 1908 was a direct response to the revolutionary wave that gripped the American working class. FBI agents, often little more than state-employed goons and thugs, ruthlessly hunted down those on the left. The FBI spied on and infiltrated labor unions, political parties, radical groups, especially those led by African Americans, anti-war groups, and later the civil rights movement in order to discredit anyone who questioned the power of the state and big business. Agents burglarized homes and offices. They illegally opened mail and planted unlawful wiretaps, created blacklists and demanded loyalty oaths. They destroyed careers and sometimes lives. By the time they were done, America's progressive and radical movements, which had given the country the middle class and opened up our political system, did not exist. It was upon the corpses of these radical movements, which had fought for the working class, that the corporate state was erected. And add to this a disillusioned populace that overwhelmingly opted for apathy instead of paying attention, you get what we have today, a corporat-ocracy built on the crumbling battles waged and won by the activists of yesteryear. The tagline of Hedges' book is the moral imperative of revolt, and judging by a country that went from slaveholders and a 6% voting bloc, I'd say that imperative is historically and presently justified. Change is not handed over by that aforementioned freedom fairy. You have to take change from the static dipshits on high. And part of this rests, as I said, in knowing your history. Know your history so you know what to repeat, rework, and refashion, and what to just leave the fuck behind, like scrunchies and polyester suits. Really, talk about society letting go. But in all seriousness, know your history. Know your history so that you can recognize the correlation between jailing a suffragette and jailing a hacktivist, a whistleblower, a civil rights activist, and a Black Lives Matter activist. This record is on fucking repeat in so many ways. And if we don't recognize it soon and jump off this sick merry-go-round, we're going to spin into a vortex of self-destruction. And that's a lot of spinning metaphors, but I think you get the point. So now that we've looked into the past, let's jump back into the present, onto the front lines, and the latest in Planet versus Plutocrats. Something that gets talked about a lot, either academically, like in Hedges' book, or indeed on the front lines themselves, is efficacy. What's the most effective action? When is the most effective time? How can we get the desired result of blah? Unfortunately, there's no blanket response to this, otherwise, trust me, I'd tell you. However, one thing that's been tried and true and continues to work pretty damn well is affinity groups. As John Jordan writes in his report on a big civil disobedience action in Germany recently, an affinity group is a cluster of between 5 and 15 people who decide to work together, staying together during the action, looking out for each other, and building trust and emotional support to enable and empower its participants. Now, in this same action that he's talking about, there were a total of about 1,500 people broken up into smaller affinity groups. And while the whole group started from the same place, marching to the same place, once cops began to blockade and kettle, smaller affinity groups were able to squeeze through, dispersing and ultimately achieving the goal of shutting down Europe's largest source of CO2 emissions, the RWE Garzweiler Open East coal mine. And that one day of action equals thousands of tons of CO2 not being released in a strong, straightforward, and unwavering message to Germany and all of the EU. Stop fucking around. We need alternative energy and we need it now. Even for a country like Germany that touts a burgeoning renewable energy industry, a whopping 45% of their overall energy still comes from coal. And that shit is unacceptable. We have far surpassed the age of, okay, let's try it, this is good enough, and no, we're in fucking serious crisis mode. Therefore, the pushback and actions of environmentalists and concerned citizens have to highlight that crisis. As Jordan writes in that same piece, Ende Gelände is not a media stunt. It's a collective act of resistance that for once feels proportionate to the scale of the emergency, catastrophic climate change, which is the size of land, sea, and sky combined. This action, Ende Gelände, meaning here and no further, I'm probably butchering it, is one of several organized in the same way in order to create said proportionate scale. Taking a page from the climate camps created back in 2006 in the UK, Klima Kamp is the German version. In effect, these are temporary alternative communities, erected close to the point of action and built sustainably to offer shelter, training, community, healthcare, and even childcare. The complex operation is self-managed via daily direct democracy meetings where issues such as how not to overburden the field's Wi-Fi to organizing the emptying of compost toilets are discussed. The organization is impressive. There are solar panel points to charge up mobile phones, an on-site cinema, an emotional first aid tent for those going through tough times, rows and rows of identical white workshop tents, an entire circus marquee filled with toys for children. In the main circus tent, which holds several hundred people, we heard from speakers fighting against coal mines and nuclear power in India, oil extraction in the Amazon, First Nations communities resisting the toxic disaster of the Alberta tar sands, and eco-anarchists living in tree houses to stop the expansion of the Hambach lignite mines nearby. We watched plays created and performed by refugees and asylum seekers. We took part in debates around new forms of radical democracy between people from the anti-austerity M15 Spanish movements, Greek anarchists describing the self-managed health, food, and production systems that have risen from the economic collapse, and a Kurdish representative explaining the experiments in libertarian municipalism, which is building a nation without a state, founded on feminism, ecology, and radical autonomy in northern Syria. All the talks are simultaneously translated by volunteer translators into at least 3 different languages via micro-pirate FM radio transmitters. Like some kind of ticking human clock, at the center of the camp sits a huge round trampoline on which gaggles of excited children bounce all day long, a salutary reminder of the future which sometimes feels so fragile. Now, he is a good writer, but that just sounds like some kind of fucking utopia, doesn't it? And it is here in these camps that people not only get a taste of society outside the confines of capitalism, but they get the tools, inspiration, and community to fight against that capitalist corporatocracy. And what makes climate camps like this one even more powerful is that they rely on and thrive via alliances. 350.org joined forces, as did the original climate camp, plus the Degrowth Summer School. It's not just one organization saying, this is our idea, let's do it. It's people from all sorts of organizations, plus people who've never even been to an action before, coming together at this one camp to fight against planetary destruction. And that diversity is both powerful and necessary. And I don't have time today to go into all the details of the action or the camp as described in John Jordan's piece, but I do urge you to grab a cup of tea, curl up with your laptop, and read this whole thing. It is an intensely inspirational read and a call to action to all of us who want to see and can conceive of a better, cleaner, brighter future. So take a look at our Facebook page for the direct link and get cozy. Now, finally today, if you're watching this, chances are that you don't also watch Fox News or CNN, or that you have in fact heard of alternative media. Or maybe you do watch corporate media just so you can see what new subject they're lying to you about. Either way, alternative media has become the media of the people. And when I say that, I mean the way it was intended in the Constitution. An adversarial press explicitly mentioned in the Constitution so as to protect the press from being poisoned, bought and sold by the powers that be. Well, now that just seems like a laughable concept if you look at the construction of our mainstream media outlets. Yeah, that's 6 companies. 6 own 90% of mainstream media. So it's no surprise that alternative media has given rise to true, honest, straightforward reporting, whether that be on the ground in Ferguson or, in fact, inside Congress. One such outlet, Shadowproof, is pushing to strengthen that alliance between movements and media, to give voice to the voiceless and ensure that any story, every politician, every law and legislation is in fact shadowproof. Kevin Gosztola, founder of Shadowproof, shares more about the role of alternative media, their brand of investigative journalism, and art and activism. Take a look. We've seen a surge in quote-unquote citizen journalism versus professional journalism. And I wanted to hear your take on this. Could it be a bit like, politicians going to the same schools and basically becoming part of the same system and not being able to connect with people? Could journalism be seen in sort of the same way?
There's something to the idea that people who have become quote-unquote professional journalists are part of a system. And so, I particularly find this as I spend a lot of time covering national security or civil liberties issues. A lot of these people have connections to security agencies, these journalists, and they maintain them. So if you have a grassroots movement that is challenging surveillance, or if you have a grassroots movement that is challenging law enforcement, whether it be the FBI or policing in general, then you get this cultural attitude maybe that is rejecting of the grassroots movement. Now, on the other hand, I think that the role of citizen journalists has been improved in the last year, 2 years, in the sense that you actually, if you're working for a professional organization, like an establishment media organization, find that these people are very reliable in helping you find stories and being able to figure out what it is that is going on. Particularly, I would say, in the instances of the uprising after Michael Brown was shot and killed by Darren Wilson, and then you have all those other instances of protests and then Black Lives Matter, you found that media really needed to reach out to these organizers in order to find some kind of a foothold into these communities. I think that there's very little difference anymore between this citizen journalist versus this professional journalist if the person who is a citizen journalist is taking a lot of time to specialize in that craft. So I find myself thinking that we need to judge it based on the act itself. And I think that's important.
Now, speaking of your site, Shadowproof, it has an interesting layout that sort of struck me. There's the dissenter section, which covers whistleblowers, protest, and the global security state's efforts to contain, monitor, and silence movements. The prison protest section, which focuses on the experience of incarceration and prisoners' rights, examining the efficacy of America's punitive criminal justice model as a whole. And then the bullpen, which explores America's escalating class war and the influence of money and the super rich in politics and society. And then a weekly podcast called The Unauthorized Disclosure. So why is it laid out this way? And in particular, why is there a specific section that focuses strictly on the prison industrial complex?
So the reason why it breaks down like that is because we have the 3 different writers, myself, Brian Sonnenstein working on the prisons, and then Dan Wright working on the class warfare column. And so we decided to break it down like that. And I find that it happens to cover really critical areas. We're able with the dissenter column to look at very key systemic issues from the security state that impact people on a daily basis. With the prison thing, I think it's very important to have that prison industrial complex column and to actually not only be talking about the issues, but finding a way to bring in the experiences of people from a rights perspective as they are prisoners inside of the institutions, all the correctional facilities, because we do have 2 million or so people that are incarcerated. And the particular focus of the prison industrial complex column so far has been to really look at this awful issue of prison healthcare inside of institutions. And so that was just a natural way to break it down. And then having the bullpen, we know that it's not just about the way that the government has set up and is going after dissenters, but there's a very real reason, and it's because you have the super rich and you have upper classes maintaining a certain social order for themselves, and you see that in their efforts to protect the 99% from having more of the pie, for lack of a phrase, they turn to law enforcement, they turn to the security state for ways that they can contain moments of civil uprising.
Right, and you touched upon this earlier a little bit. It also says on Shadowproof, it says that you're going to be forming relationships with organizations, and I was curious, is this an active movement building role? Is this let's create actions and events together, or is this we're going to be here for you to report on what you're doing as strictly as a journalism space?
The role that we want to play is more of an asset and not as a leader. I'm not about to step forward into any position in anybody's group or organization and try to steer a movement or any sort of effort in any direction. What I want to be able to do for organizations that are just now finding out about Shadowproof is to have you send your stories or your, I guess I could call them tips, but I really just want to know what people are doing in their communities. And then when we can find that there are things that are going on that should be covered, we make connections with those organizers or those people on the ground that are subject to injustice or are trying to change the way things are. It's about supporting those people who are traditionally kept in the shadows and don't often get the kind of support that they should from our media system. And the other thing that I haven't raised, I just feel like inserting into this discussion, is that there's also the role of bringing in out of work and struggling journalists that are already and have been doing great work covering movements and possibly are part of these communities but don't have a platform. And if we do find them, one of the things we're very committed to doing is finding a way to pay and support them and bring them on board to Shadowproof and give them a home and make sure that they feel respected in ways that they might not be respected if they tried to go get their work published at establishment media websites.
Right. And I'm assuming that Shadowproof is not funded by a shadowy corporation or something. You guys are funded by, reader donations, that sort of thing?
We're going to have this membership program, and it's really, I see journalism as like a public service, and there's this trend towards not paying for journalism. But I think we can see what happens when you don't pay and support good journalism. It devolves. What we're getting is free, but is it good? Is it really what you want to read every single day? Because it's trending towards listicles or being patronizing towards you or serving powerful interests. And here's a kind of journalism, not unique. There are other websites that are doing what we do, but I see really focusing on not only bringing people that journalism that has something real to it that points towards those kinds of issues that are not given coverage, but also then finding a way to form bonds and connections between people by bringing in those journalists that deserve a platform, those organizers that deserve a platform, bringing people together and making sure that we're able to dig in and get down to, what are those things that we really need to be concerned about as a people.
Right. I mean, the press is the only industry that's directly mentioned in the Constitution, and the whole point is an adversarial free press, which is, as you said, not what you get for free these days. So that concept is certainly well shared by activists such as myself that look for information for the shows that we do, and even the actions that we do by looking at sites like yours. So finally, I'm also curious, you have sort of an arts, you mention arts and activism on the site as well, and then you have the protest song of the week. Why do you feel that, with everything else that's going on the site, why did you feel that it was important to add that artistic section?
Well, for one, personally, I come from an artistic background. Although I'm not out there making movies, I have a film and video degree. And I've always had this feeling that it's very important to art to find a way to embed that in the real world, in the real world experiences of people, and to not necessarily push a message ideologically, but to make sure that it's grounded in what's going on a daily basis for human beings. And so I saw an opportunity because I'm very interested. We launched a protest music project. And I think that this is very critical because we can't just, I think as an organization that's very committed to some pressing issues, you can't just only be concerned with those pressing issues. I think you also have to be concerned by the way that artists are trying to give voice to these issues, to make this become part of their art, because otherwise, you have burnout, you have the issue of only being concerned with how things are terrible every day. And what you have with artists is this expression. These songs that I'm featuring as part of this protest music project, and we have a weekly feature, and then also I put together a list of albums in the last 5 years just to show that there really is protest music and it hasn't gone away. And the effect is just to show that there are people out there that are expressing themselves and responding to the current state of affairs that we have in this country, and that it's not just the only stuff out there is corporate, or it's not that everything out there is just empty, celebrity-driven, gossip-type media.
Damn, and don't I know a thing or two about vapidity in the music industry, but that's a whole other low-life scum award there. For now, check out shadowproof.com to get more info, and that is our show for the week. Thank you so much for watching. Please spread and share this episode and show with all of your friends, foes, and people you don't know. As always, check out the last slide to see all the sites that I've mentioned in the show. There will also be a link to help support Occupy.com and the delicious dissent delivered daily thanks to donations like yours. It is a 501c3, so anything you can contribute is tax deductible and hugely appreciated. Be sure to follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube. From this slightly hacky Devil's Den, good night and act out.